100 best novels list, I hear you say? Well, who doesn't love a good list? I do, and I love having opinions on other people's lists. So come and join me in this video to find out what I think and have your own say in the comments down below. Hi, welcome back to Bookish Brummy. My name's Mel and I like to review books. So today's video is not going to be a book review video. What I want to do today is I want to talk about the list. So, The Guardian newspaper about 2 weeks ago brought out a list which was supposedly the 100 best novels of all time. And these novels are basically novels that have been either originally written in English or they've been later translated into English. So obviously myself and everybody who's a bit of a bookish person has gone and had a look at that list, and I've seen a couple of podcasts and videos coming out now of people discussing that list, and obviously I also want to talk about that list. I've talked about it with all the people that I actually know in real life, so now I thought I'd talk about it with all of you. So in order for them to create this 100 best novels list, they asked 170 people, and of those 170 people, I believe 100 of those were authors, and then the other 70 would have been critics, or people that are fairly sort of well known in the literary world. So, of those 100 authors, the one thing that I thought was quite interesting is The Guardian, when they were writing about how they came up with this list, they were patting themselves on the back because there were 36 female authors asked for their opinion out of that list. Okay, so not quite half. But when a similar list was compiled, I think it was in 2015, I think they said only 21 female authors were asked for their opinion. Now, they're saying obviously that that's better, that 36 have been asked, but I suppose my first thing that I want to say about that really is most of the novels that I read now today are written by women. I am reading male authors, but there's a lot of female authors out there, and there's a lot of really good female authors out there. And actually, when I look back on, my reading challenges each month, 50, if not 60%, or even slightly more some months, it's mainly, female authors that I'm reading from. So why could they not have asked 50 female authors and 50 male authors? Like it was their challenge, they set it up and they're congratulating themselves saying, we've got now 36 female authors out of the 100. Well, why didn't you just make it 50? They could have found 50 female authors and 50 well-known female authors at that. I'm absolutely positive of it. So I don't think that would have been too hard for them to do. So I just wanted to point that out because that kind of grated on me a little bit just as I was reading about how they actually came up with the list. But anyway, of these 170 critics and authors that were asked, they were all asked to pick their 10 favourite books and rank them from 1 to 10. And then what The Guardian did is they then took those lists of 10 and then started to, cross-match them with all the others. And then, the ones that were picked the most out of those 170 people then made it into the top 100 list. So if an author had picked 10 books, it doesn't necessarily mean that all 10 of those books would have actually made it into the top 100 list. It would depend if the other 170 people had also voted for that book. Now, where a book may have been voted the same amount of times, which has happened as I've gone through the list, so you'll see that like one book will be at 100 and one will be at 99, and they've actually both had 3 votes. But what has caused it to be slightly ahead of the other book is if, for example, when people were voting for that book, how high they then put it in their own list. So again, that in itself kind of obviously makes this a very subjective list. And I also think if you're going to come up with the 100 best books of all time, actually asking 170 people, that's really not a lot of people to ask. So as you actually start looking at how many people actually voted for each book, you can see that like book 100, so the book that got into the 100 spot was The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and that got voted by 3 different people out of that 170. That's nothing. 3 people saying that that book is my favourite book. That's 3 people think that. That's negligible, And then at 99, we had Catch 22 by Joseph Heller. And again, 3 people voted for that book. So again, that's really not a lot. And actually, where it's at 3 votes per book, that goes all the way down and doesn't change until you get to book 91, which was The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. I think that's her name, Ursula Le Guin, yeah. And she had 4 votes for that. So for the first top 10 books in this list, actually, they've only really had 3 votes apiece. Now, if you're making a statement saying, this is the greatest novel of all time, I expect more than 3 people to vote for that book for it to end up in the top 100 list. But I don't actually think that the sample, like the size of the pool of people that they asked, was big enough. It just, you know, you can't say 100 books and then only ask 170 people. You need to do over 1,000 people, I would say, to even begin getting even close to an actual proper best 100 novels list. So I think that's my gripe on how they actually came up with this list. I'm not saying that the people that they asked don't know what they're reading, but this is all really subjective, because obviously, you know, this is also about how much you like a book. And I haven't really dug into all of the people that were asked, obviously, but that information is available. I'm going to post this Guardian article in the description box down below, so you can go and see all of the books for yourself, and then you can actually go and see who voted for those books and how many of them voted for each book. So you can go and see this for yourself. But if you actually, you know, there is somewhere, I think, on that site where you can see which authors and critics that they asked. So that was quite interesting to go through. And I can see that they have a range of people. So even Stephen King was in there. They asked Stephen King, so I was really happy about that. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But, you know, they had all kinds of writers in there. Bernardine Evaristo, who we read her book the other week, Girl, Woman, Other. And then there was Salman Rushdie was on there. And then a couple of crime writers as well, like Ian McEwan, Elif Shafak. Yeah, they're quite well known. Author was on that list, and like Maggie O'Farrell as well, who we read a book from her the other week. So there was quite a range, and I was also really pleased to see a YouTuber on there. So Jack Edwards, who is a YouTuber, was on there and asked for his opinion. So I really liked that. I really liked the fact that they did recognise YouTube as a way where, you know, people are going and looking for opinions on books and giving opinions on books. So I thought that was really, really good. But yeah, if you were to actually go into all of these people and all of their backgrounds, you can, if you click on each person, see which books they voted for. Now, with 170 people, I haven't gone through this list, but I'd be interested to know if British authors have been biased towards picking British authors, if Irish authors have been biased to picking Irish authors, and American authors have been biased to picking American authors, have female authors been biased to picking female authors, and such the like, you know. So we obviously all have our own bias, I think, in all the things that we do. So I think that is another thing to take into consideration when we're considering, okay, this author's top 10 books. Now, as I said, not every author's top 10 got all of their books into the list. I came across one author who'd only had one of their books actually included in the top 100. I can't remember which one that was now, because I was going through trying to find an author who had none of their books in the top 10, which I haven't done yet, but I haven't clicked on every single person in that list. So it's possible that there is a critical author in that list who compiled a top 10 and didn't even get picked. So I really want to talk about Stephen King actually, because obviously he was asked for his opinion on this list. So I went and had a look at what Stephen King's top 10 books were. So I'm going to tell you that, because obviously I think that, you know, I talk about Stephen King a lot on this channel, so chances are if you're watching this video, you're probably a fan of Stephen King. So you might want to know what his top 10 novels of all time are. So he picked at number 1 Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Now, Moby Dick did get into the top 100. It came at number 15, so that was quite hot. His second favourite book is Ulysses by James Joyce, and that came in at number 3 on the top 100 list. His third favourite book is Light in August by William Faulkner. His fourth is The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson, I can't even read my own writing, McCullough, I think that is. 5 is The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. 6 is Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. 7 was Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. 8 was Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Now, Madame Bovary did get into the top 100. It came in at number 10. Number 9 is Nana by Emile Zola. And number 10 is McTeague by Frank Norris. So of his top 10 books, 3 of them made it into the top 100 list. So that's not so bad, because actually of the 3 that he picked, they were actually in the top 20 as well. What I would say, of all of the books that Stephen King picked, I haven't read one single one of those. So let me know in the comments if you've actually read any of those as well. And I have to admit that it was a bit of a surprise. I think I was expecting some more like horror choices or darker books in there. Obviously, having not read all of these, I don't know how dark they actually are, but I don't know, I was really anticipating like Bram Stoker's Dracula or something to be in there, but no. But one thing I would say, I'm not going to run off, I don't think, at this point, and go and read Stephen King's favourite books, just because I've always thought, I say always, so you know when you, on a front cover of a book, and you see an author that you really like, and they have given a blurb about the book saying, oh, this is a fantastic book, or this is a great read, or something like that. Okay, so we're seeing that more and more these days, where authors' comments are left on the front covers of books. And every time I've picked up one that Stephen King has commented on, saying, you know, this is basically a great read, it's been terrible, or it really hasn't gone over a 3. And I've got to a point now where I don't know that I judge Stephen King's opinion on other people's work. So it's almost like more likely to put me off reading the book, to be honest, if I see that he has actually blurbed the book. However, this is not to say that he wasn't just giving a review for the book and being polite, and because he's famous, they've, you know, as a famous author, they think, right, we're going to take that comment and we're going to put it on the book, and he was just being polite, you know. It could have been that, but honestly, I've had a couple of reads, and unusual books as well, books that I didn't really think that he'd be reading or reviewing, and he's gone, oh yeah, this is really good, you know. And there was actually one time with one book where actually I think he left the comment on the author's first book that they'd published, and then they used the comment again on the second book that they'd published, and it was like, well, he obviously didn't make the same comment about the second book. So yeah, it's hard to know. I don't want to turn this video into talking about how much you can trust the blurbs on the front of books, but all I'm kind of trying to say is that when I've seen Stephen King blurb a book, most of the time I have not really actually thought much about that book. But that doesn't mean to say that his opinion doesn't count, because he's obviously a brilliant writer and he's obviously read a lot of books in his time. Now, interestingly, I just wanted to look at the figures of how many people actually voted the top book as opposed to the bottom books. So the bottom books were like those at 199 that we already talked about, and they only had like 3 votes, and that carried on for, you know, from 100 down to 91. So in first position was Middlemarch by George Eliot, and actually 56 people voted for that book. So I'd actually say that that's a lot more powerful number, because that's like over a quarter, you know, that's just under a third of the people who were actually polled and asked for their opinion had picked Middlemarch in their top 10. So I'm not saying that they all picked it at number 1, but clearly enough people picked it that it's ended up number 1 in this list. The second book in this list came out as Beloved by Toni Morrison. So that was one I actually read in award-winning April, and I wasn't surprised to see it on this list, because it's a really, really powerful book. And 43 people had voted for that book. So again, that's quite a lot of people voting for that book. You know, and I've actually read that one myself, so I can say, yeah, that one is worth the read. So yeah, there was a massive difference between books that have made it up into the top 100 compared to those that had made it into the top 10. But if you actually walk back through the top 10 and look at how many people voted for each, I think by the time we get to the third position, that's like dropped down to 30 something. And then like down in 6th position, it's like 20 something or whatever. So it's sort of dropping off as you get down past the top 10. So I would say out of this list of 100 for me, the most interesting one is probably the top 10, because I think the top 10 has the most amount of votes in. So it's really more indicative of, yes, this book is really enjoyed by quite a lot of people, not just this book is the personal favourite of 3 people who were asked out of only 170. So that's how I'm kind of approaching this list as well, when I'm thinking, you know, is there any good am I using it to streamline what I'm going to read soon? And it's only probably in the top 10, I would look at those top 10 and think, okay, so many other people have said that this is a great book, so maybe actually I should read this book. That's not to say that I haven't been through this list. I've actually been through the whole 100, and I've been reading the blurbs of some books I obviously never heard of, didn't know existed, and thought, oh, that sounds really good. So one of those actually was Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. I'd never heard of that book, and it actually sounds really, really, really good. Interestingly, that one, I can't remember where that one got down to now. I have the list in front of me. I'm just trying to find it. Okay, Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie came in at 23. So apparently he is the only living, like he's the highest ranking living author on this list. So again, that's really quite interesting. That obviously everything below him, the authors are now deceased. And I think that actually, as I was going through this list, I did kind of realise that it's not really a contemporary list. A lot of what's on the list is a lot of old classics, a lot of old tombs, and a lot written by writers who are no longer with us. So again, I wonder in the bias, if there's a bias in people voting for not voting for themselves, for starters, and not voting other living authors who may have been taking part in making the list too, if you see what I mean. So, for example, would Stephen King vote for Maggie O'Farrell knowing that Maggie O'Farrell is also compiling this list? Like, I don't know. That's hard to say. But I do wonder if in another 100 years' time, if they made this list, what we now see as contemporary fiction that's been released now and within the last 10, 15 years, would that now be making it into that list because it's had long enough to simmer in, social consciousness and be consumed by the public in order for it to be considered great? Because I think when I consider the fact that, Jane Austen is really overly heavily represented in this list, as is Charles Dickens, and so is Leo Tolstoy. And these are like, these authors wrote absolute massive tomes of books, and they are, quite hard going. And I've got to be honest, with those books, I've read one or two of them, but not a huge amount of them. And I can't entirely say that I enjoyed reading them. It was more of an achievement to finish them when I read them when I was younger. And that to me, because I reviewed Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen earlier this year, and Jane Austen is just not for me. But I think part of the issue for me is I don't relate to it. It's really got nothing to do, really, with my day-to-day now and the society that I live in. And that's why I kind of struggle with these books, because I just don't feel there's enough going on in them that's really exciting to me. Now, I know a lot of other people do like these books. I've seen other YouTubers that like absolutely love Jane Austen. So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with them, but I'm saying that from my personal point of view, they're not really something that I enjoy. And I don't know anybody in my actual personal life who really enjoys those books either. So yeah, like I just wonder if you went out and sort of polled the general public, what kind of list you would come out with compared to the list that's been compiled here. Again, who knows? So I am not going to go through this list from 100 to 1 because that is just going to take too long, and you can go and follow the link and look at the list yourself. But what I would like to do is I'd like to go through the list, and I'd like to look at what I have read that's on the list and what I have on my shelf that I haven't read that's on the list. So I thought we could talk about that because that'd be quite interesting. So at 97, there's Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. Now, I have this book on my bookshelf, but I haven't read it yet. At 76, we have Dracula by Bram Stoker. I have this book on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet. At number 65, we have The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. I have this book on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet. And then at number 20, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. That's on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet. 16 is 1984 by George Orwell. I have that on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet. And then at number 14 is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I have that on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet. And then at number 6, we have Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. That's an interesting one because I did a soft DNF on that. I've half read it. I started reading it years and years ago, and it's quite big, to be honest. And I think I got about halfway through, and then life just happened and I forgot about it. But I was actually kind of enjoying that. And then at number 4, we have To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, which I also have on my shelf, which I haven't read yet. So that is 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that's like 8 books that I've got on my shelf that I've not read or finished reading. So that's not too bad. So let's have a look at the ones that I've actually read. So I've read Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So that one came in at number 62 on the list, and I read that during award-winning April. So you can see the review for that in the award-winning April playlist if you wanted to see that. That was an absolutely brilliant book, and I'm not surprised to see that on this list. Then at number 59 is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I don't know that I've reviewed this on this channel because I think I read this before I started the channel, but Kazuo Ishiguro is an absolutely fantastic writer and has actually won the Nobel Prize for fiction. I really, really enjoy his books. He's one of my favourite authors, and Never Let Me Go is an absolutely fantastic novel, so I would actually recommend that as a read as well. Getting further down at number 36 is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. So this one I think I reviewed in November time or possibly December, and recently the other week I had read the follow-on from this, which was The Testaments. I think that The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood is a very important book. I think it says a lot about what can happen in society when women are silenced and they've had their rights taken away from them. However, I don't know that I would pick that as in the top 100 books, but I do suppose that it's had an impact for sure. So maybe it does deserve its place there. But I'm not sure that I would necessarily put it at 36. I might put it a bit further back than that. Next, at number 35 is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. So I have read this. I read this when I was probably about 13 years old, and I kind of enjoyed it, I think. I didn't mind it. I do prefer Charles Dickens' work to that of like Jane Austen, I have to say. And I wouldn't be opposed to rereading Great Expectations again as an adult or any other of Dickens' work. But I'm not surprised to see Dickens on this list. I think that he's actually got quite a few books on this list. Yeah, and Great Expectations is the only one of his that I've ever actually read. Coming in at number 24 is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. Now again, I read this for award-winning April, so you can see a review of this in the award-winning April watch list. Absolutely loved this book. It was it was my third favourite book of the month, but I'd had difficulty trying to rank this one against Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So in this list, The Remains of the Day has actually beaten Half of a Yellow Sun, but in my list I put Half of a Yellow Sun just above The Remains of the Day, but it was a very, very difficult choice. I do recommend The Remains of the Day. I think it's an absolutely fantastic book. So yeah, Kazuo Ishiguro is represented by 2 books in total on this list, and I have read both of them. Okay, and then coming in at number 8 on the list is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So I read this book when I was about 12 years old, and this is one of those books that I don't remember the story that well, to be honest. And when I read it when I was 12, it was more of an achievement that I had read it. I don't really actually remember enjoying it very much. But I think as an adult, I would like to try and read this again and, you know, see if I would enjoy it a bit more. I just think maybe the relationships in this were a little bit too mature for me at the time to fully appreciate this book at the time. Okay, and then the final book I've read was number 2, which is Beloved by Toni Morrison. So again, I read that in award-winning April, so you can see a review of that in that watch list. And actually I had ranked that one lower than Half of a Yellow Sun and The Remains of the Day. So actually this list is almost the opposite way round to what I had ranked all of these in award-winning April. However, the only reason that Beloved was ranking lower in my list is because I didn't look forward to reading it. The subject matter in Beloved is so heartbreaking, and honestly the book itself I think traumatized me. It took me about 2 weeks to get over. I'm not going to forget about this book in a hurry. I think the story is going to be in my brain forever. So it is very, very powerful writing, but when I was doing my ranking it was more about, you know, what am I looking forward to reading again as well, rather than just, you know, how strong and well written the book is. Whereas this list I think is more about, you know, literary merit and stuff, and not necessarily just about how much you enjoyed it. So I can well understand why this is number 2 on the list, and I don't have a problem with that. I think that, you know, I would recommend it as a read, but just beware before you go in. This is not one to go into to cheer yourself up with. It's a very sensitive subject matter, as it's talking about a woman's experience of slavery. And it's really quite horrific, if I'm honest. So, given that I've read half of Anna Karenina as well, I think we can say that I have read 7.5 books out of these top 100. And there's like 8 that I own, but there's a crossover between that half. 8 that I own that I haven't read, so in reality, that's 14. However, this list did inspire me slightly, because I remember a few years ago, I think it was in 2015, the BBC compiled a list of the best 100 British novels. And at number 1 on that list was also Middlemarch by George Eliot. So this means that in 2 novel ranking lists over the last 11 years, we've had Middlemarch by George Eliot being number 1 on that list. So I've gone out and I've actually bought, if you see that, Middlemarch by George Eliot to read. Now, as I say, there's a lot of classics on this list, and I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of classics, and I don't enjoy reading them that much. But given that this got, how many votes was it again? 56 people voted for it, which is quite a staggering number out of 170 to be, you know, the number 1 in this list. And it was also voted on the 100 best books by the BBC, like best British novels on the BBC. I thought, you know, this book has got to have something about it, you know. And I read the blurb on the back, I've got to be honest, and if I was, you know, browsing the bookshelf in the shop, I would not necessarily have been attracted to this book. However, I'm going to literally read this book because I think if everybody else is raving about it, then, you know, I'm just missing something. It's obviously not that well marketed. You know, maybe the blurb could be better or something to pull people in. So coming up in a challenge soon, I will be reading this book, and then I'm going to do a review of it and report back to you and let you know, do I actually think that this has a place on the 100 best novels list? So yeah, I think there's a lot of things that you can say about lists, and we all love a good list, don't we? And I think that, you know, these kind of lists are a good place to start when you're trying to think, you know, what should I read, especially if you're kind of new to reading. But I also think that you have to be kind of a bit critical of the list and think, you know, how was this list put together? Who put it together? Who got a say in the votes, everything? And also, really, if we consider this list, it's also very biased towards literary fiction, because there isn't really any fantasy on it, and the only sci-fi that I'm aware of is The Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. So again, sci-fi is not really represented. I don't think horror is particularly represented on this list either. So there's a lot of genres, like, and crime as well. We don't really see any crime on here. So there's a lot of genres on this list that are just kind of left out. And that doesn't mean, you know, that they're not great books, but if you are predominantly a crime and thriller reader, then using this list as a starting point probably isn't really going to help you. But what you could do is do what I'm doing with the list, which is kind of using it, going through it and thinking, well, how could I, you know, expand my reading experience out of the genres that I know that I like? And is there any on this list that are in genres that I like that I've not really heard of, you know, because if people have voted on there, maybe like, you know, I'd like to go and read it. So as I'd mentioned earlier, there was the Salman Rushdie one, which was Midnight's Children. I'd never heard of this book before, but actually I think that the premise sounds really, really good, and I think it's like magical realism. Well, Beloved by Toni Morrison is also magical realism. So, and I, didn't mind that aspect of that book, so I probably will at some point try to get hold of that Salman Rushdie book as well and have a read of that, because I think that that looks really, really good. Also with the Ursula Le Guin, The Hand of Darkness, I think that's what it's called, The Hand of Darkness, or was it The Left Hand of Darkness? Let me just check in case I'm saying that completely wrong. The Left Hand of Darkness, yeah. So one of you mentioned Ursula Le Guin to me during the Kate is May challenge, asking me if I'd heard of her, and I had not. But I say she's one of the only people really representing sci-fi on this list. So I'm really tempted to go out and get this book now as well, because I don't mind dabbling in sci-fi a bit. And if this is the one that's got people's attention and has got in the top 100, then I think actually I'd like to give this one a go as well. So let me know in the comments down below if you have read this list, what you think of this list, and how many books have you read out of this list, out of this 100, and how many do you own that you haven't read, and are you inspired to like actually go out and buy or borrow from the library any of the books on this list to give a read yourself? I actually really enjoyed making this video because I've really wanted to talk about this list for a couple of weeks, but there's just so many things that you could actually say about this list and so many ways to sort of look at it. It was difficult to try and think about how I was going to actually have this conversation. So yeah, let me know, join in the conversation down below in the comments box, and in the description box I will put a link to this article so that you can see it for yourself. Thanks for watching. If you've liked this video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see my future content, please press the subscribe button. And I'll speak to you soon. Bye!